Now, Eylon Levy joins me in the studio. He's the spokesman for the Israeli government. Lovely to see you in the flesh.
Hello, Camilla. Good to be here in the studio.
I know you've had a very, very busy 3 months. Let's talk about Lord Cameron and what he said about the conflict in the Middle East this week. Am I worried that Israel has taken action that might be in breach of international law because this particular premises has been bombed or whatever? Yes, of course. Is the Foreign Secretary in support of Israel? Are you worried about what he's saying about you breaching international law potentially?
The Foreign Secretary and the British government absolutely stand behind what they said immediately after the massacre when the Houses of Parliament and 10 Downing Street were lit up in the colours of the Israeli flag. And that is Britain wants Israel to win this war. And we saw just before those remarks by Lord Cameron, which were taken out of context by the press, he said, after consulting Foreign Office lawyers, he has no reasons to think there are violations of international law. And he was very clear in that very interesting column he wrote with the German Foreign Minister that Hamas must lay down its arms. There can be no future for Hamas in a post-war Gaza. And we know that the United Kingdom still stands shoulder to shoulder with us as we fight to bring back the hostages and bring to justice the terror regime that perpetrated those unspeakable atrocities 100 days ago.
Are you worried, though, that UK and US support is slightly wavering? I mean, these concerns about whether you have or haven't breached international law, I take your point about this perhaps being taken out of context. But there is this sense to which the Western world and the international community are keeping their eyes closely on Israel and Israel's behaviour, which wouldn't suggest that they have full support, that everything that Israel's doing. Is that fair to say?
I think Britain, the United States and the rest of the Western world understand that we are fighting for humanity on the front lines of humanity. They understand that after Hamas invaded Israel on October 7th, massacred 1,200 people, abducted 250 people, anything short of a total Israeli victory over Hamas would send a message to terrorists and violent extremists all around the world that you can massacre people and democratic societies have no right to fight back. And let's be clear, that is what the protests on the streets of London yesterday, the pro-Hamas march, is calling for. They are calling to save Hamas from the consequences of its actions. And we know that Britain stands shoulder to shoulder with us because as we see, even people on the streets of London yesterday calling for Houthi attacks against British ships, they understand that we're on the same side.
Some marchers will say we're not pro-Hamas, we're pro-Palestinians.
They would say that.
And they'll be worried about the growing death toll in the Gaza Strip.
Of course. But if they were truly concerned about Palestinian civilians, they would call for an end to the fighting that sees Hamas surrender.
Well, when will the fighting end? Is that when Gaza's destroyed or when every Hamas terrorist is killed? Or is it actually when the US and the UK and others say, OK, enough's enough?
We're in a fight for our lives now. There will be no end to the fighting that leaves the hostages in Gaza and Hamas still in power. Because the first thing that Hamas did after burning, beheading and raping so many people, abducting all those hostages, was to tell us that it wants to do it again and again, and one October 7th was not enough. We want to end this war. But we want to end this war in a way that makes sure Hamas cannot attack us again, because that is its reason for existing, in order to wage never-ending war and jihad against our people. And so if anyone thinks we're going to abandon the vulnerable hostages in the Hamas terror dungeons, they're sorely mistaken.
But how do you assess a sort of victory for Israel in this? Because it could be a case of numbers. We know that key targets, key Hamas leaders have already been taken out.
Well over 8,000 Hamas terrorists.
But how many need to be taken out for this to end?
Our goals in this war...
Every single one? And what does that look like in practice? And how long might that take, do you think?
Our goals in this war are to bring back all of the hostages. There will be no one left behind. We do not intend to abandon them there. And to destroy Hamas's governing and military infrastructure. And by the way, our fight against Hamas is very similar to the fight that Britain and 85 other nations had against ISIS a decade ago. They understood they can't defeat an idea. No one thought they were going to destroy Islamic extremism for all. But you can remove it from power. And Britain joined together with other nations to say ISIS cannot have territory from which to conduct attacks against the rest of the world. And our fight is very similar, with one small difference. This isn't 1,000 miles away. This is literally our backyard. Some people's homes in Israel are only meters away from the Hamas terror regime that is telling us it wants to burn whole families again. And we need our people to be able to go home, to go to the homes that were burned to a cinder on October 7th, and to sleep safely in their beds. And for that to happen, the Hamas terror regime can no longer be their neighbour.
And what of those who accuse Israel of committing a genocide? You'll be familiar with the scenes at The Hague, South Africa, of all nations, bringing a claim of genocide against the Israelis. I was interested to see former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn pop up at that hearing. I don't know what your response was to the hearing, but also his presence at it.
Defending Israel at that case was the expert who literally wrote the textbook on international law, and on the other side was Jeremy Corbyn. Camilla, on October 7th, it was Hamas that perpetrated an act of genocide. It sent its death squads with a mission to burn, behead, rape, torture, mutilate and abduct as many people as possible. And we are fighting to bring back the hostages and to bring Hamas to justice. And we think it is outrageous that South Africa has decided to act as the legal arm of Hamas. Because what South Africa is trying to do at The Hague is to give Hamas a stay of execution, to intervene, to save Hamas's skin and shield it from the consequences of the bloodiest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust.
South Africa will be saying that it's trying to stand up for the people of Gaza, not necessarily Hamas as a regime.
South Africa, on October 8th, blamed Israel for the massacre. South Africa is a country that has aligned itself diplomatically with Iran and Russia and Hamas. And we think it's tragic that a country that once had a reputation of so proudly fighting against racism is now fighting pro bono on the side of the biggest racist of all and trying to save Hamas from the consequences of that. And by the way, the UK has also said South Africa's case, we say it's absurd. The UK says completely unjustified and wrong.
But it could be two different things, couldn't it? You know, on one hand, you're saying that they are launching this campaign, this hearing against Israel. It could just be that they're launching it in support of the people of Gaza because there are legitimate concerns about the number of civilian casualties. They are legitimate, those concerns, aren't they?
There are definitely reasons to be fearful for the safety of civilians, but the answer to that is to demand the surrender of Hamas, to demand that the terror regime that perpetrated those atrocities lay down its arms, release the hostages and hand over its war criminals for a tribunal, not to leave them on their feet free to fight again when they are telling us they want to commit repeated acts of genocide. If you think you're standing up against genocide, you don't intervene to save the skin of the terror regime that is telling us one October 7th was not enough. It wants to commit more and more atrocities, and that is why we are committed to fight both Hamas and to fight these absurd proceedings that the United States has said are meritless and particularly galling because the people bringing those proceedings are those committed to further acts of genocide against our people.
I mean, we've talked about the strikes on the Houthis. How concerned are you about full-scale war breaking out with Iran? I mean, so far Iran seems to have been hiding behind some of its proxies, but at the same time you'll understand that people watching and listening to this show are very worried about Britain's involvement in the escalating situation in the Red Sea.
Yeah, and by the way, the escalation is a reminder of the importance of the UK-Israel alliance, because on the one hand, you have the rapists of Hamas and pirates of the Houthis who are allies. On the other side, the UK and Israel are allies, and it's clear that we are on the same side fighting for international peace and security. Now, we do not want to see an escalation. We have been warning since October 7th. We are going after the October 7th monsters. We don't want to see this escalating. Unfortunately, Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy in Lebanon, decided to join this war on the side of Hamas. It's fired over 2,000 rockets into Israel. It's led to 80,000 displaced Israelis who have not been in their homes for 3 months and can't go back to their homes because Hezbollah is shelling them. And we are warning them, enough is enough. Desist, back away from the border as UN Security Council resolutions require, back off or we will have to push you away. Because our people need to return to their homes in peace and security. We don't think it's very much to ask for. We want there to be a peaceful diplomatic resolution. But if that does not happen, we are prepared to fight to get our people home to safety.
Eylon Levy, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.